An attempt to halt the possibility of an all-out trade war, offering to buy US $70 billion in American goods in the next year if the United States backs off its proposed tariffs on imports of Chinese products. Well, fresh from a visit to Beijing to attend an investment conference, James Tayler is the head of research at Morphic Asset Management. He joins us now live from our Sydney CBD studio. James, thanks for joining us. Now, it does seem that you know, the US and China are perhaps in the early throes of this maybe becoming a serious position that there could be a trade war. Having just been there, and obviously you would have got the Chinese perspective very much while you were there, how do you see this?
Good afternoon, Helen. My perception is very much related to the local view of China as opposed to the US, the Western view that we're often subjected to. I think the Chinese are being very clever in tackling President Trump in a language and in a way that he speaks. That's a business way, and I think actually the Chinese are recognizing that their economic position is perhaps stronger than is perceived in the US and in the rest of the world. A lot of the companies that I sat through presentations from, met with, spoke with, are actually seeing such relatively high levels of growth that, yes, they might be behind their US competitors in terms of market share, but give it a couple of years, they're going to be way ahead of them. And I think that's giving confidence to China and its leadership that you know, they've got a stronger hand here.
Yeah, okay. Can you give us a couple of examples of those sorts of things? Are you talking very significant sort of economic subsets, you know, perhaps in AI, in very advanced manufacturing, those sorts of things?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, clearly the tech sector is very important. It's very important for the US economy and the US capital markets, and absolutely so the case in China. Through most of the subsectors of technology, I witnessed companies explaining the Chinese companies' presence in the international, the global value chain for semiconductors, for artificial intelligence, for e-commerce. And whilst they might be filling 40 to 50% of that value chain currently, they're growing so fast that by definition they'll be overtaking their Western peers pretty quickly.
Yeah, so it's interesting when you sort of look at it. I mean, do you see that the US, from, as you say, the Chinese perspective, is on the defensive, and that's perhaps both militarily as well as economically? Absolutely.
I think it's almost by default the last play in the playbook for a mature economy. China can outgrow. They're also leaning, and we had several keynote speeches from senior ex-military individuals from the US, and they're all talking from the same book. Military history and doctrine suggests various outcomes, most of which are conflict, and we see that throughout history for economies, for, I was about to say the word empire, maybe an inappropriate word, at that point of maturity. So the US very much banging the drum, but I think they were very candid as well in observing the clever moves that the Chinese have made in terms of very heavy investment in the newest technologies. But this isn't investment now, this is investment 10, 15, 20 years ago, such that there's a very large inventory of new military equipment just about to be floated, to hit the air, to run across the land. So having observed that, I think it's quite easy to understand the nervousness from an American perspective.
All right. Do you give President Trump any points, if that's the right sort of way to look at this, for bringing out into the open the loss or theft of intellectual property and those sorts of things? And how do you see that going? Because, I mean, you know, you talk to senior Chinese business people and they say, oh, well, our intellectual property is stolen as well.
I think this is a universally used tool of economic competition and ultimately economic warfare. I think Trump's right to mention it, but I think every leader of an economy in this situation would also suggest that. An interesting note from many of these Chinese companies, particularly in the tech sector, was that they were very keen to highlight the educational background of their senior leadership. And they weren't.
Which is what they all went to Ivy League schools in the States.
Absolutely, the States, Europe, as well as some local homegrown talent, but reflecting the typical age of these management. They've gone overseas, they've got educated. Now this is something that an administration can halt, but it can't change the impact. And clearly, China has benefited from this.
All right, so what sort of companies were you most impressed with? Just give us a few examples. I mean, were there some, for instance, in autonomous cars or, something interesting that really caught your attention?
Oh, absolutely. In the field of autonomous vehicles, I think the general perception is that Waymo, which is a part of Alphabet or Google, and perhaps Tesla, which is more an OEM, the perception is that they're the leaders in a global context. But what I witnessed, and the company in question is Pony AI, a privately held company currently.
Chinese?
Chinese, yeah, and Pony AI, and they have the advantage that they have a central party behind them whose policy is to promote this technology, and as a consequence, they can suddenly mandate a whole region of a particular Chinese city to be open for autonomous vehicles, and they can make that decision overnight. If New York, for instance, was to suddenly decide, Lower Manhattan was open to autonomous vehicles, I suspect that decision would take quite some time to get through the legislative framework and the other frameworks that exist in that society. The Chinese took a policy view and backed this company, and they demonstrated amazing things.
Yeah, James, I just wanted to ask you about this current sort of concern among Australia's exporters of wine and meat and things like that. They are concerned that the diplomatic tensions, the political tensions between Australia and China are spilling over into perhaps this go slow. And we know Trade Minister Steve Chobo was over there, last month, and perhaps it's got better since then. Did you get any insight into that?
I didn't get any specific insight into that. There was some discussion around Treasury wine estates and the like, and the impact on that company. But I mean, the reality is, whilst the perception remains that the world revolves around an axis through the US, then the US will be pretty front and central to those discussions on a global scale, vis-a-vis trade between the West and China. But it's clear for me, and it has been clear for some time, and it should be to all investors, that the axis of the world goes through Central Asia, through China.
Yeah. All right. James, I'm sorry, we have run out of time. We'll have to leave it there. James Tayler from Morphic Asset Management, great to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Helen.